I'm Bob Putnam. I'm from the May Institute in the National Technical Assistance Center, and this afternoon I'm privileged to be with Kim Yannick and the team from the Virginia Beach School District to talk about using data to support classroom PBS. You've probably already seen these questions previously in some of the sessions, but we think it's important that you look at in terms of where you are, in terms of your implementation. What do you hope to learn from this particular session? What did I learn? What will I do with what I learned, particularly in terms of your teams? And our goal is really to look at in terms of using your self-assessment to figure out in terms of where you are and where you want to go. And we would really like it if you can fill out the session evaluation form at the end. So our learning outcome, and we also want to thank a number of folks who have contributed to the work that we've done, from Midwest PBS to Mid-Atlantic PBS and a variety of other folks along those lines that have contributed to this work. So the goal, what we'd like to do is explore the importance of alignment across the cascade of implementation. If you look at in terms of a school, from individual students to classroom teachers to the whole school, as well as look at district implementation around positive behavior classroom supports. And the question would be, why do we want to look at classrooms? When you look at your Swiss data, how many of you use Swiss? Right? So when you look at your Swiss data, in many cases, classrooms have the most referrals. Students spend the most time in their classrooms. A goal is really looking at in terms of how do we build a system of supports for the teachers across those classrooms. Oftentimes the practices that we're looking at, particularly at Tier 1, are very similar when you look at in terms of what happens in classrooms and what happens in non-classroom situations. Now, if you look at, if this morning any of you went to Brandy Simon's workshop, did anyone go to Brandy's? Oh, we got, okay. So Brandy went over this morning what are the evidence-based practices in classrooms. She's done a complete literature search with her team. And these were the things that came out. Behaviorally specific praise, at least 4-to-1, if you look at in terms of what actually works in terms of classrooms. A high OTR rate, opportunities to respond, as well as routines and procedures defined and explicitly taught. So if you look at in terms of routines and in classrooms, how are they explicitly taught that the students know what their actual routines are. And there's social skills that are embedded in the classroom. We're teaching the expectations. We're teaching in terms of how to behave in the classroom in terms of in whole group situations, in terms of small group situations, entering and exiting the classroom. We have a set of routines and expectations around those particular routines. We're also looking at how do we do pre-corrections around those specific time periods where, in fact, there's more problematic behavior than other situations. So if you can take a minute or two and just turn and talk about in terms of why you think classrooms are important in terms of classroom behavior support. And if you look at in terms of the practices, do you see these practices in your classrooms? So how many of you think it's really important that we have good classroom behavior support practices? And if we look at in terms of our work in terms of PBS over the last several years, we've come to realize it's really important that not only are we working at school-wide positive behavior support, but we're really focusing in terms of the classrooms. And so that's why we're here today, is to talk about that. I'm going to turn this over to Kim. This is Kim Yannick from Mid-Atlantic PBS.
Thank you. You have the remote. All right. So we've all had an opportunity to kind of think about why we're here, why is this important to us. So my role is really to kind of set the stage for the Exemplar team who's here to share their experiences around this capacity building approach with you. And so I imagine if you look up here at this cascade of support or cascade of implementation, you're going to see yourself fall somewhere along that cascade, yes? Yes. So what I want you to think about is, where do I fall in this cascade? And we've got a vertical slice of that cascade here to kind of share with you what were each of our roles and responsibilities in terms of this capacity building approach using data to inform fluency building with classroom practices, right? So you've got people who are at university and TA centers. Who are those folks in the room? Okay, some of us. So sometimes we start the training, if you will, as an external provider. We have state folks who do the same types of support. Do we have state folks in the room as external providers? Okay, how about district implementation teams or district leadership? Okay, so you all are up here and you're really looking at the schools as your unit of analysis for support. What about school level teams? Who are the school teams lots of teams, okay. So you all are really, in our approach, what we're going to ask you or invite you to consider is, how does that school team really facilitate capacity building with all of the staff in your building, right? And then the staff, we're going to build fluency with them so that we've got these effective practices, right, that impact positive outcomes for students. So what we're going to look at first is, along this cascade, how do we think about alignment of what we're doing? So the first thing we did was to look at, okay, we need some alignment around what are the priorities with the classroom practices we're going to focus on. What's our shared understanding about what those practices look like and sound like? And what's our shared language, right? Is there alignment work to be done because we've got maybe some 32 shiny initiatives around classroom management in our districts, in our states? And do we need to look at alignment of language? So we used the tiered fidelity inventory. Anyone using that? Fidelity, okay. So we took our assessment and we used backward design planning to develop the curriculum and instruction. So everything was aligned. So all of us along that cascade had the TFI to anchor our language, our fidelity to, our action planning around. We had shared language. The other thing we did is we took those 8 classroom practices that I'll show you in a moment, and we looked at how they map onto the TFI, what we're doing in the TFI, right? Because there's only one feature in Tier 1, 1.8, that looks at classroom procedures, right? So if you're not using the TFI, it's broken down into 3 subscales. We look at team, implementation, and evaluation. Over to the right, you see 8 classroom practices that we prioritize as these are the practices we are going to focus on, and we're going to look at how we build capacity and fluency with these practices. What we discovered is when we crosswalk the practices with our Tier 1 curriculum, 4 of those map on very nicely, right? Think about your feedback ratios with acknowledgement, error correction. Those apply in classroom and non-classroom settings. So we began to look at, okay, how do we really align curriculum and identify a really efficient and effective way of getting this information and supporting teachers to build fluency. The other 4 practices, we haven't discovered how those might align just yet as part of that initial team professional learning. So we come back to those in different ways and provide additional opportunities for professional learning. But still the same 8 practices. We start from day 1. Everyone is speaking the same language. We identify and develop shared understanding of what do we mean by these shared practices, okay? So alignment really gave us the anchors, if you will, for this work that we're going to show you. It gave us that common way of work, common language, common messages. So what we looked at doing is we took the public health model, and I love Brandy's example, the ice cream model, if you will, and we used it to organize our resources to build a really efficient and effective system of support for the adults in the building, right? So our exemplar is going to show you how the district person, because their unit of analysis is supporting schools, what they did for all schools. But within the school, that team that's in charge of facilitating and building fluency and capacity, what is it that they planned for all staff in the building? We didn't assume that anybody knew any of these practices. We made no assumptions. Everyone got the same professional learning around the 8 practices, right? And then we looked at, okay, some of our staff may need additional support, so they need the chocolate sprinkles maybe, the whipped cream or whatever else was on Tier 2, right? So some teachers got another layer of support. And then we had the cherries, right? And so, again, cherries are really expensive. And so how do we be really intentional with the way we organize our resources and allocate those resources so that we have a smaller number of staff members who need that more intensive resource of support, right? And so we did this, but we used data to inform everything we did. So our exemplars are going to give you very concrete examples of, well, what did that look like and sound like in our school, in our district as we did that, right? And so we've all got these tattoos, but this really supports the work that we did. I think in Brandy and Jen's session, Vermont talked about how they use this at the state level as well. I might be misquoting that, but it's a way of work that we generalized, right? So we looked at, you see the outcomes we were trying to get to, and equitable outcomes, culture. You're going to hear this exemplar team talk to how much culture matters when we go to look at building the system of support. How do we make these things contextually relevant and consider the culture for what's safe, a safe way for us to lean into this, of building support and engaging classroom teachers in these building fluency with these practices. So we looked at different types of data, and you're going to hear them talk to how they use student outcome data, they use fidelity data, they use progress monitoring data, even from Tier 2, to inform, hey, we've got some teachers who might need a little bit more support with this. How do we invite them into a relationship to help build that support with them, right? And then we looked at, okay, what are the practices based on that data that we need to either spiral back around to? You know, we've already done something for all, but maybe some teachers need an extra boost, or it's March and we're tired and we all need an extra boost to remind us about feedback ratios or what have you. And then very important is the system. So they're going to talk to you and share just different examples of the systemic supports that they put in place to support the adults in their building and their district to build fluency. And we're going to show you how we built capacity so that I might be that initial person who brings in professional learning, but our goal was to have that gradual release of responsibility. So you'll see by the end of 2 years, we had teachers then leading professional learning, not just in the school, but in the entire district, right? They are brilliant. Can't wait for you to hear from them. So I've set up for you kind of the context, looking at how do we look at alignment across the cascade, step number 1. Do we have shared language, common practices that we're focusing on? We looked at using our curriculum, our Tier 1 curriculum, and how we put classroom practices right with that. We looked at using the public health, or the ice cream approach, if you will, to organizing our resources so that we can be really efficient and effective with how we allocate those resources to support teacher fluency. And then we had the circle tattoo, right? Always looking at the integration of those outcomes, data, practices, and systems. So now I want you to think about, where are you in that cascade of implementation, right? Because you're going to think about, as you listen to the exemplars share their experiences, how does that impact my role, either the people who are supporting me or the people I'm supporting in that cascade, right? So what you're going to hear is the approach that we used was we used the school-wide PBIS team, the team that was responsible for facilitating implementation of Tier 1. That's our starting point. And so on that team, we had strong administrative support, and those folks really developed systems of support for classroom and non-classroom implementation, right? We used data to inform everything we did, and you're going to get some concrete examples of that. And finally, that alignment, right? And looking at culture, how do we make this contextually relevant to what we're doing? So before I introduce this team, I want you to know that there are some resources available attached to this session that are going to give you the whole kit and caboodle, but so you can go back and get those. One is the guidebook, which defines and outlines for you exactly what we did. Here are the practices. Here are the data collection tools. How did we roll this out? What did it look like? And then we've got a sample district implementation plan. So if you're at the state level, you can think about how you might build supports around making this happen. If you're at the district level, you can look at how you're going to roll out supports for your schools. And then there's three technical systems briefs now. One is on systems, data, and practices. You're going to hear them talk extensively to the systems piece. That's this one. And then the new one that's out now, it's a draft version. We're still tweaking it. Is that accurate, Dr. Putnam? Okay. It's really going through really intensive resource around data and how we use that for classroom. So I'm going to introduce this team for you, and they're going to talk to you about how we did this, right? So our team is from Virginia Beach City Public Schools from the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I mentioned we have representation of the diagonal slice here.
All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to show you what we did over a 2-year period in implementing PBIS in our school and building the capacity of the teachers and staff within our building. So if you think about the ice cream model again, so the for all our staff received professional learning. We had options for data collection, self-assessment, surveys, fluency building days. We were using data always to inform our next step, even within the tiers of support for our teachers. And so for some, we focused on some continued professional learning communities within the school, using data that we will share later for some of our precision statements and focusing on which perhaps grade levels needed some more support, which teachers needed some more booster training. And then, of course, we had an opportunity for teachers to also ask for a request. One thing that's very important to know is that from the very beginning, when we started this implementation of PBIS, that both administrators, we were part of Tier 1, or team for Tier 1, and we supported it across classrooms, across the building, across areas within the building. And so we were able to support our teachers in a non-evaluative way. And that was really important that we communicated that to them, that when you're asking for support, it's not going to be reflected in an evaluation, and that we encourage that. And so we just maintained a positive environment around that, so that if you were a teacher at the very top with the cherry filling out a request for assistance form, we considered that positive, not something negative. And then, of course, we were using leadership team data at all times, making our decisions. One of the reasons why we dove into PBIS is because our division, our goal 3 was to support the social and emotional growth of our students. So this perfectly aligned with what our division goals. And so we used the PBIS implementation as part of our plan for continuous improvement for our school. And then we added in a goal for the social and emotional growth of our students, and we were able to use PBIS data to track that. And then we also encouraged the teachers in their talent ed goals to encourage and to support a PBIS goal, so that it was aligned. So the conversations that we were having during collaborative planning days or during our professional learning communities were directly aligned to our school needs, our student needs, and teacher needs. And then, of course, when we invited some district leadership to do learning walks in our school, and our school was very comfortable with learning walks. We were typically having teachers or other administrators or division leaders going on learning walks within our school, so it's a safe environment for our teachers. We had division leaders come in, and we created a look for the positive behavior interventions. And so we were able to tie it back again to where the goals of our district.
All right. And just to clarify, these are the support systems that we offered for all of our staff. Our Tier 1 team facilitated all of the professional development and the implementation process for all of our teachers. Our entire staff participated in the professional learning. So that included all of our support staff that we have in the building. Again, creating that common language and just building that fluency within our school. We gave lots of different options for data collection, and staff acknowledgement to support our implementation, and then also it was really just contextually relevant to our school culture. And Catherine talked a lot about the school climate this morning, and our school was really unique, and we had a lot of opportunities to give these options to our staff to make sure that they felt safe and also were committed to the work that we were doing. This is just a snapshot that's available for you guys, and is an example of how we sent out some of the data regarding the classroom practices, the 8 practices that we implemented to our staff. So it just kind of gave the why and the how and the look fors that we were coming around as a team, and it gave them just a really easy reference point to kind of have. So as far as the different concrete examples that we use for data collection and our sharing options. So these are just examples, again, that we use in our school, but could also be completely relevant for your culture. So the different options that we offered for all of our staff was first the self-observation. So we just had opportunities for teachers to record themselves and watch. And oftentimes that's really eye-opening when you get that opportunity to do that. We had peer buddy observations. So whether it was a grade level team that wanted to observe a lower grade level, so a 3rd grade team might want to observe our 2nd grade or a grade level above. So we encourage that type of observation. And then we also had coaches come in, our external coach. And again, this is just a request for assistance. So this was teacher driven. Again, we didn't assign a coach to come into any specific classroom. This was completely generated by the teachers themselves. Lots of opportunities for self-assessment and reflection. So whether it was a journal entry or other things that we shared grade level or just personally, that was something that we gave them. And lots of surveys. Google's great for that. It really gives us an opportunity to get some quick data, and especially kind of drives our feedback. Once we got all of that data, these are some of the options that we did when it came to sharing. So we gave all staff implementation of the 8 classroom practices. So all staff received that training. And then we used kind of anecdotal teacher data and the perception data to share more on specific practices. We used our precision statements. Again, we were a school that used Swiss, so that's how we had our data drilled down. And we used that to kind of drive our precision statements for classrooms by grade level. And that was aggregated data. So it wasn't specific to a certain teacher. It was across the grade level or across the school, identifying hotspots or certain types of behavior that we were seeing. And when we were sharing it, we always did it at whole staff meetings. We shared the data during our professional learning communities. And then we really focused on the celebrations part because people like to be acknowledged and you are committed to some hard work that's happening in your school. So that was a big piece for us. Once we had all that data, we collected it and then we shared it. Like we've been saying, we really used it to inform all of our decisions that we made as a team. The precision statements were based off of minor and major. So we had a flow chart that we determined those 2 types of behaviors, and it really guided our implementation as we were layering on these supports for the classroom practices. This is more a systemic piece, but once we started looking into some of the data, we had our teachers generate some solutions as far as which 8 practices they might want additional support on moving into the 2nd layer. We used our external trainer and the resources that they provided to us, and then we just kind of modified it on how we were disseminating that information to our staff. The same 8 practices that we implemented in the 1st year are the same 8 practices that we did in the 2nd year. We just used the data from year 1 to see what kind of extra booster session we might want during year 2. And then again, we had opportunities for staff to participate in the 8 practices again in the year 2. And not only building fluency with the practices, Lori's going to talk a little bit about how this was so important to shift our cultural mindset within our school.
So believe it or not, not everyone buys into the PBIS model. we thought they would. So when we rolled out with our Tier 1 team the PBIS model that we were going to be utilizing at our school, including our behavior matrix that our team worked diligently on. And it was our Tier 1 team was representative of all teacher types. So we had special educators, teachers, administrator, specialists, and we were shocked, actually, that there were some who just they didn't get it. And it was a real struggle. And so it was a real eye-opener to us to realize that what we are asking some people to do, think, act was paradox to the way that they were raised, perhaps. And so it was really going to take a shift in mindset. And so we were going to have to continue to build that capacity, but again, in a very supportive and non-evaluative way. One lesson that we learned was we thought it would be so helpful as a Tier 1 team when we built our behavior matrix to include a classroom matrix of what it looked like based on our value systems. Well, after year 1, we learned we need to give that back to the teachers so that the teachers were invested in it and so that they could also be fluent with the language and the expectations in their classrooms. So those are some of the lessons that we learned.
And just touching briefly back on the cultural shift, I attended 2 sessions this morning and spoke really true. Just acknowledging the vulnerability and the idea that this is a working document and a working process and there will be mistakes made. And that was really important to us in that shift of culture, is acknowledging that, oh, shoot, I was thinking that way. And maybe you weren't aware of it. So having those discussions was really important and really valuable for us as a team. This was our systems. This is the who, what, how that we did it. Our administrators were a part of our team, and I will speak as a teacher. It was incredibly powerful to have administrators who were obviously committed to the work that we were doing and encouraged us and supported us throughout the system. So that was a big deal to have them involved as a part of our team. We had our school counselor, Holly. Holly was great. Is someone who knows all of the students. And then again, we had lots of different teachers that were involved and kind of rose to the top as specialists in certain practices. So we started using them as opportunities to support our full staff when it came to this implementation. Lori's going to talk a little bit after this, the scheduling. Again, speaking as a teacher, the valuable minutes that we have in school. We were able to do all of this during the work day. So whether it was PLCs and et cetera, Lori made it a really great thing for us to be able to participate that during the school day. So if that's possible, it's a really great thing. The what? So how do we kind of get this all out to our staff? Again, being respectful of their time, but also encouraging commitment and support of the systems that we were putting in. We tried to think outside of the box. And again, this is culturally relevant to our school, but we had really great opportunities to create webinars and send those out to our teachers and have them accessible throughout the year. So they were able to access any of these things that we created whenever they might need it or a refresher. Face-to-face, we had lots of discussions, grade level, staff, and one-to-one that we offered for our staff. We did a lot of flipped learning. Again, the valuableness of time. We sent it out and then asked them to reflect or ask them to maybe try and implement some of those practices and then touch back, and we had conversations about how it went with our staff. Our school created some videos of exemplary models for the 8 practices, and those were also available for our teachers. So again, those kind of teacher leaders in your buildings and those people that kind of rise to the occasion, this is a really great opportunity to film them and just have them as a resource for the rest of your staff. And again, the non-evaluative part of the learning walk, Lori said it before, our school culture, we're used to having adults in the room, and it's a very encouraging idea just to have people around giving you feedback on what you're doing and the 8 practices that we are doing.
So we started off with faculty meetings. We we tended to not have a lot of after-school faculty meetings, but when we did have them, they were focused on PBIS. We had, when we had required staff meetings, required professional development, it was focused on PBIS and the building the fluency and the capacity within our school. Again, because remember, it tied back to our division's goal 3 of the social emotional growth of our children. And so we had supports from our coach. Teachers could ask for the support. Nora was around, weekly, so that we were accessible to her. The teachers could meet with her during their planning time, so she made herself available at all times. We built our master's schedule with an extended collaboration time. So every grade level, 1 day a week, had an extended collaboration, so that not only were we addressing the academic, but also the behavioral needs. And if you went to, I can't remember which session I went to, but it was about integrating the behavior and the academic supports, because they do go together. And then we kind of joke that we say the district professional development days. The first year we had 6 snow days, which never snows in Virginia Beach. And the second year we had 6 flooding days. So that sucked up all our professional development, but we were able to figure it out and reschedule because we made it a priority. And then of course during our pre-service days was ideal to, the first year was to implement, second year was to do the booster training.
Okay, so I'm going to speak to what we did for some. And again, just remembering back that this is the support we gave our teachers. So a lot of the time we did professional learning communities, which would be more by grade level, so small group. And within that group, we were able to give focused support based on data to show what the specific groups needed. This is an example of a precision statement that we would use at a small group. If you notice, this is the who, what, where, and when. So the teachers could really focus in on what actually was happening and figure out what support they needed to put in place and have additional support so that they could make sure that the outcomes were what they wanted. Again, we're using the same 8 practices. We're supporting smaller groups of teachers, but we're still offering the same practices to them. Speaking to the systems piece, we shared these precision statements with the grade level, so it would be grade level specific. So 3rd grade might have had different issues with, hey, it's obvious that we need some work around routines and procedures at 10:15, heading to PE. And they were able to generate their own solutions based on the 8 practices. We were able to monitor from the outcome data, teacher feedback, and observations, whether these supports were doing what they wanted. And we also leveraged our internal resources to support fluency building. We noticed, again, to what Rose said, that some of our specialists really rose to the top and they were able to go and model. So if a teacher was kind of uncomfortable with one of the practices or needed some extra support, we had those specialists to be able to go in and model with them. This is me too, okay. Okay, in addition, so once we got to there, some of the data really started to show that individual teachers might benefit from some additional support besides the small group, besides the PLCs. The teachers could also request specific support. I had in my box notes that said, hey, I'm really having trouble with, and they could circle the practice. Could you come in and work with me on that? And of course I would, or they could email me. I was always available. This is just an example of some data that informed me that maybe I needed to go and offer some support. So we did some self-evaluation, and as you can see, the percents that these teachers indicated were below 80%. So that was kind of a trigger for me to say, hey, are we ready for some additional support? What can we do around that? So because I offered support to them, it wasn't evaluative, they were able to generate what do I need to raise that 70% above that? Was it that we needed to talk about routines and procedures? Did they need to raise their ratios? So it was really, the data showed what specific practices they could work on. We also had DPR data. I don't know if you're familiar with the term, daily progress reports. That also could inform need for support. Was it consistently low for a specific time of day or a specific well, teacher. So, missed that word. That's a kind of a good day for that one. To go ahead and let us know where we needed to focus our direction. And again, even at the cherry level, even at the very top, it's still the same 8 practices. We can't stress that enough. We're using those 8 practices to support all of the work. So a lot of modeling happened in our school, a lot of peer observations to be able to support each other. The check-in, check-out coordinators, that's one of our tier 2 practices, and the facilitators would consult with me and with our team internal coach to also develop more support. And of course, we always had the ongoing feedback. And I'm going to go ahead and pass to Dr. Putnam to give us another example of a tier 3 support.
So let me talk to you about a teacher who had pretty significant problems in terms of managing her classroom. Oop, wrong one there. So if you can see the precision statement, there are a few students, actually 12 students in the room that basically had significant challenging behavior. And the goal was, on her end, she wasn't very happy in terms of what she was doing at this particular point, was looking for some support. And one of the goals we have, we look for teachers who are looking for support to be able to buy in to the system. So she wasn't a new teacher. She had actually been teaching for about 20 years. But the 2 classes that she had were challenging classes, and she was looking for some support in terms of improving that. So one of the things we did was we took some baseline data, collected some office referral data from her, also looked at in terms of her on-task behavior, the students' on-task behavior, looked at the ratio of positives to negatives, also looked at active supervision. And this is, I'm just going to move quickly, that's the form. And this is what her data looked like, because one of the things we did was provide graphic feedback to her in terms of her performance. So her on-task behavior was about 60%. And you can see the praising to behavior correction is about 1 to 3. We really like to have 4 to 1, right? So it's not really, and if you look at it in terms of proactive monitoring, it's pretty low as well. So we provided this feedback, gave her 3 coaching sessions. All right. We looked at it in terms of being much more supportive than evaluative. This was not connected to her evaluation. And we randomly observed students every 15 seconds to see in terms of whether they were on task or not. And then on the other hand, every 15 seconds it looked at her behavior as well. Did about 10-minute observations. So this was very, very quick in terms of providing feedback. So one of the things she wanted to improve was on-task behavior. She also was interested in improving her ratio of positive statements to error correction, and she was looking to also improve her active supervision. So we provided some coaching to that. So this is what it looks like afterwards. She went from about 60% on-task behavior to 78% on-task behavior. Her praising to behavior correction is still not 4 to 1, but it's at least in the positive direction, right? In terms of that, and a lot of the research we've seen, if you can get it to 1 to 1, oftentimes you'll see behavior change. 4 to 1 is the best. 10 to 1 is even better, but sometimes you can just get 1 to 1 and you'll see behavior change. Well, what do we see? We all like triangles, right? So 67% of the students in her 2 classrooms had 0 to 1 referrals, 30% had 2 to 5 referrals, 1 had 6 or more referrals. If we're using this information, traditionally we'd be saying that 30% would really need tier 2 interventions, and the 1 would need to have tier 3 interventions if we looked at it in terms of that. There's another way graphically to look at it. I'll just point out the 1 student at the end had 7 or more referrals during the first half of the year. All right. If you look at it in terms of the post-consultation, post-coaching, she's got 97% of students now over the second half of the year of 0 to 1. one student basically has 2 to 5. You can see that the student who was the high flyer, basically at that particular point in time, was not sent out of the office again. So just a brief consultation around classroom supports and using the data, we find is very, very effective in terms of making differences in terms of the amount of service that students might need. So 97.5% of the students responded to universal strategies. Small group interventions after the classroom intervention were targeted for one student. None of the students at that particular point in time needed Tier 3 intervention. So we've been very successful with this type of model, which is similar to what you guys did in terms of your Virginia Beach as well. All right, I'm going to turn it over to...
I am the school counselor as well as the Tier 2 lead. And so as the Tier 2 lead, I'm in charge of the check-in, check-out. And Nora and I get together and review the data of the DPRs, the daily progress reports from the students that are in checkout on a weekly basis. And some of the things that we noticed, the one student was doing really well in the first half of the day. She was meeting her 80%. The second half of the day, she wasn't. Here she was going to another class with another teacher that wasn't, or maybe didn't have the 8 classroom practices in place, as well as the other teacher. So Nora and I consulted, and Nora talked with the teacher and did a little modeling. I would go into the classroom and do some modeling for her, and really helped out with the one student, and her percentage did rise. We also looked, being in check-in, check-out, and looking at all the data, we consulted with some classrooms that needed some help with the positive behavior game. And so one example that I would do, I would go in to do a guidance lesson and be intentional on starting with the positive behavior game and modeling that for the teachers that might not do that in the classroom and show them the positive results from that.
So we want to show you some of our student outcome data. So at the beginning of our implementation in September of 2015, these were, when I say average, these were referrals that were coming to us, but they were major and minor referrals. And you can see there is a little bit of a difference between September and October. What we decided was quickly that or actually between September and November, and then it went down, is that we needed to come back around, and we had to redefine what major and minor referrals looked like and what the responses would be, and how we would use that data to inform our decision making at the next level. And that was okay, because that was a lesson learned. So this reinforced what Mr. Putman had said at the beginning, that most of the referrals are going to come out of the classroom, because that's most of the time where the students are. And so we were able to look at, when those referrals were happening. If you look, the green is representing the first year, and then the purple the next year. And so what we could imply from that, an observation that we made, is that the teachers were becoming more fluent with the 8 classroom practices. Therefore, the referrals were dropped, and they were able to keep kids in the classroom longer. And we know that if kids are in the classroom longer, then they have more of an opportunity to be successful academically. So this is our tiered fidelity inventory. And so if you look over the 2-year span, as I said to you at the beginning, this was implementation over 2 years. You can see that we did reach our 80% by the end of year 2 for Tier 1, and that we had made a marked increase in fidelity with our Tier 2 practices. So that's good. And we saw it and we felt it in our building, and we know that our kids felt it as well. And Nora's going to talk to you a little more about growing our green.
So Dr. Putnam said that we all have triangles. Well, we have a triangle that looks like a rectangle, so try and beat that one. But as you can see, we are clearly growing the green, and everyone's heard that phrase. It's really important, and our school and our district really, really want to see that happening, and we're so proud of this result. Something else we wanted to show, and again, we can't say one is because of the other, but this is what we noticed, that as our discipline data dropped 47% in 2 years of implementation, our academic data also shifted at this specific school. So SOL is the state test that we use in Virginia. So 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, all went up in reading, all went up in math over the same implementation period. So we celebrated that quite a bit, and we wanted to share that with all of you. Is this one me? Yeah. Okay, sure. All right, some of the lessons learned. Again, something that was integral and everyone commented on from staff, like not just instructional staff. We're talking about bus drivers and custodians, that having the administrators really be a part of this was really key. It also became very apparent to all of us that you really need a good data collection tool. We happen to use Swiss. I know there's other things out there. And it really supported our Tier 1 and Tier 2 supports for teachers, as well as students, obviously.
All right, so I just want you guys to start thinking about how you're going to be, again, going back to what we asked you to think about at the beginning, is where you are in this process in regards to both the cascade of support and then where you are as a school culture or a division culture, and start thinking about how are you going to lean into this. So do you host an environment that supports a culture of coaching, lots of different people offering examples? Is it a culture that supports self-reflection and you're encouraging your staff members to be reflecting on their own practices? That idea of support versus evaluation, again, that was really important to our school staff, is that it was non-evaluative, and be thinking of how you can be promoting that within your school. The practices are probably going to be the same, but it could be a separate system that you layer it on with as far as the who, the what, and the when. And just be thinking about, does your PBIS team have an administrator? And kind of talk to your balcony view of your team and where you are as far as resource allocation and where you'd like to move forward. So maybe about 2 minutes to turn in talk, just be thinking about that, or you can be self-reflecting at your seats.
So I'm curious to hear from you. Did you hear something from the person you were sharing with of how they think, what are some important considerations, how they might start leaning into this work? You could start on this side of the room. Anything you heard from the person that was sharing with you that is share-worthy for the rest of the group here? Besides happy hours at 5. Good information? Yes. Yes, thank you. And there we go.
Okay, we did do turn and talk earlier, but this time I just sort of kind of self-reflected on the ideas that I had written to incorporate for our school. And we have a lot of the same systems in place that you guys have, and we've been in the implementation process for 3 years, and this is going into our 4th year, and we're experiencing an implementation dip. And so where we are right now is, of course, it happens with attrition and all of those things. So I was thinking, okay, so I texted Dean and I said, when are you having your next new teacher meeting? And then also the idea that I wrote down was when we have that meeting, can we invite our last year's new teachers? Not to leave out everyone else, but that's going to be the starting place. And so I just wrote down that we need to develop our support model, and then also make sure that our administrators are all on the same page with that support.
Thank you for sharing. So 2 important considerations: administrative support, and I'm hearing you say you're going to lean in with new teachers and so that's a great entry point for you to practice and develop your support plan. Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Anything else on this side of the room? How about this side of the room? Anything you heard share-worthy, how you might lean into this, or some important considerations? You too discussed happy hour, and we won't share that. That's okay. Important stuff. Yes, right here.
So we talked about an elementary building that has completely turned over. They had an F grade from the state, and so we did some.
Anybody relate to what she's talking to?
Yeah. So we talked about how we could go in. We're both district administrators, so thinking how we can go in and support. Sometimes thinking about us as district administrators, it seems evaluative and not supportive. Even though we are very open to jumping in, rolling up our sleeves and helping, figuring out how we can really help them to see those 8 practices. And then the other issue sometimes we deal with is that teachers just take care of it. They don't actually do the office referrals, and the classroom is on fire, and they should be, but they're not because they don't feel like anything happens anyway. So we're not sure how that data maybe isn't as accurate as we'd want it to be, and probably need to kind of look at that. But being able to go in and support, I think, is the critical piece.
I think, Lori, didn't you have an experience? You want to come over this way since they're filming? She had a similar experience with the data.
Yes, and we had to go back in and we had some conversations. For some teachers, their eyes lit up when they saw the data and they acknowledged it. But for some teachers that we felt like the data was not reflective of what was going on, we had conversations, and that was part of also the teacher self-reflection. When Nora would model the error correction versus behavior specific praise, we asked teachers to take data themselves, but then for some we had to have some conversations. That's the cherry. But most everybody was in the ice cream. A few were chocolate syrup.
We're all going to carry this acronym forward, aren't we? Something to add, Rose, when you come up here?
We were just turning and talking and discussing, well, how do you encourage teachers that you know might need lots of cherries, and they don't really acknowledge that, but they're still coming to you and saying, listen, little Timmy is driving me crazy. Like, he's the one, like, you gave him to me. What's going on in this class? So it's ideally, we're shifting that culture of thinking about it as a specific student that isn't responding to discussing with their teachers, okay, well, what kind of support systems are we putting there for that specific student? So just changing that mind shift to students versus what kind of support am I offering in the classroom was a really big shift for us.
We call that slipping in the peas sometimes, right? You don't want to eat the peas, but okay, anything else to add to that? Yes, ma'am. The presentation has already been uploaded. The 4 resources that I mentioned in the beginning are there. I'm going to show you some other resources very quickly, though, and then we'll open it up to questions. And anything else, Dr. Putnam? Yes, sir. There we go.
I was just interested about the coaching piece, and Nora, you were talking about that, and we're identifying coaches on site that are oftentimes, teachers that they're trying to free up and hopefully providing a stipend or some time for them to do that. But we're finding that they're not really effective because they don't have the time to do it. The other, though, is that bringing in, and I've been an outside consultant, but to come in and coach, there's this idea of having social capital with the team that you're working with. And so I'm kind of curious about Nora's experience coming in and coaching as a consultant that might not have that connection, I guess.
That's a great question. And in fact, that was a concern of mine as well, coming into a division where it was kind of new in general for PBIS. And I have to say that it kind of shifted over the course of the year. So during year 1, I did probably more of the training kind of piece. I was there for the meetings, but nobody really wanted to let me in their classrooms too much. But as I built the social capital and they were comfortable with me, by year 2, they were definitely requesting or comfortable having me there. Or also the other hook would be, hey, I'm coming with your team lead, like the person who needs to know how to do this. And I would sit with Rose or with Holly, and then I was welcomed in. So kind of teaming up within the building really helped as well.
Great question. So to your point, I think it was Brandy and Rachel who talked about inviting us to think about moving away from coach as a noun to coaching as a verb, and how do we build a culture of coaching, which is that whole capacity building approach. Again, sometimes when we use this approach in buildings, we want it to be positive. We don't want it to be viewed or received as a deficit approach. So sometimes we invite the teachers who are really stellar and say, hey, we've got this coaching approach we want to use. Do you mind playing in the sandbox with us and help us kind of iron out some of the wrinkles and identify how this might work best? We've also had teachers that we've invited who did need a little bit more support and offer that to them and then use their expertise after they had kind of gone through this process, again, to build fluency and capacity in the building. So I'm going to show you a couple quick resources. If you do download the PowerPoint, there's hyperlinks. We tried to put hyperlinks so you don't have to go look for them on 20 clicks to get to anything. So one is the work that Kent and his group did on the field guide. I don't know if you know if this is there, but if you look at training and you develop training, there is a feature on page 14 that addresses classroom and how do we embed. So again, think about alignment, right? If you're looking at curriculum and instruction around this work, how are you looking at alignment at your level? Because alignment takes place above the level of implementation. We don't want teachers to be figuring that out. So it's a great resource if you're looking at equity and how do we embed this within this work. There are 3 briefs. Again, you've seen this one, supporting and responding to behavior. They recommended that you don't download it or print it, but just download it because there's hyperlinks throughout, and it's really easy to navigate if you use it that way. And there's a systems brief. So this is the practice. This is the systems brief. There's a professional learning blueprint. So there's 3 blueprints available at PBIS.org as well. In the blueprint, it's been revised recently, I believe, and within that is a sample of a professional learning plan that shows how you might approach this, embedding and aligning classroom with Tier 1 and looking at a spiraling curriculum and coming back with the different types of support that you might utilize. The data brief, we mentioned that earlier. It's still a drafty version, but it's a really good resource for looking at, again, how do we use data to inform our decisions. Terry Scott, brilliant resources here at the ABRI, and there's a hot link for you. There's plenty of resources out there for y'all to access. Mid-Atlantic and Midwest, there's recorded modules, if you will. So Rose spoke to flipped learning. You could have teachers, think out of the box with your professional learning. They could listen to that, come back with a snapshot, plan how they're going to build fluency for themselves, collect data on themselves, etc. Midwest has a really comprehensive, all of those materials are aligned, but the snapshots and all of those things are there for you. We talked about that one. Missouri, we steal a lot from Missouri. They have great stuff too. So I encourage you, that's another good one that's very comprehensive with the resources. And we saw the snapshot. So I'm going to open it up to questions, but really what we wanted you to, hopefully that you kind of started thinking about is how do I move away from that one and done approach to supporting fluency building with classroom management practices? And how do we kind of lean into building a system of support to allocate and organize resources really efficiently and effectively? So open it up for questions. Yes, ma'am. So the question was, there a formal request for assistance? I'm going to take this off and let you all talk to what you did. Like a form or email, all the ways you did that.
Yes. I mean, I literally made a form myself that just had the 8 practices listed and what kind of support they wanted. Like, I'm struggling with, and then they could fill it in. I would like support on. They could circle it. It was just a little half sheet. That was my for teacher support.
And it was available, not like you didn't have to make it public if you wanted to go request that. So we had a space with all of our materials that teachers could access just kind of in our mailbox room. So that kind of lent to just asking for help, again, without drawing, anonymously.